As the situation then stood in Italy, it was apparent that a steady advance up the peninsula demanded a succession of outflanking operations. Head-on attacks against the enemy on his mountainous frontiers would be slow and extremely costly. The real question to be decided was whether the overall interests of the Allies would be best served by allocating to the Italian operation sufficient resources to maintain momentum in the advance, or whether, on the contrary, we should content ourselves with minor, well-prepared attacks in the mountains with limited aims, but with maximum economy in men and resources.
Shortly before Christmas, 1943, General Eisenhower made a tour of the front lines in Italy. Our advance against the enemy was proceeding slowly, and in many places was bogged down owing to the weather. One of the chief reasons for the General's tour of inspection at this particular time was to try to give a lift to the morale of the men at the front. In addition to coping with the bitterly resisting Nazis, the GIs faced the overwhelming problem of functioning in a quagmire of mud. The Italian campaign was ranked with the toughest waged in the war. The terrain was treacherous. The physical problem of moving forces of men and quantities of equipment in the rugged country was an enormous one. Waging a war in such country required inexhaustible energy. In the mountainous areas, where most of the heavy fighting was centered, the GIs had to make their way painstakingly up to the summits, staggering under the weight of shells they would shortly fire at the enemy.
Carefully planned minor offensives comprised the campaign I used during the winter, amidst the inescapably miserable conditions of the Italian mountains. Yankee ingenuity and resourcefulness were tested to the limit. The terrain was cut up by rivers, large and small, which ran athwart the route of advance. Some of these were so winding that they had to be crossed several times.
The Volturno, which the Allies first crossed in October, was such a river, winding back and forth across the path of their advance. Now swollen by the heavy rains, it became a continuing problem to Allied forces. Since the supply route to the front up ahead must be kept open at all costs, it was imperative that a thoroughfare across the rivers be maintained in usable condition. In December 1943, this assignment was an extremely difficult one. The pontoon bridge, capable of being constructed quickly, was used to great advantage many times during the early years of the war. But occasionally, in critical conditions, it proved not durable enough. In Italy, as in all theaters of the war, casualties were not always the result of direct enemy action. To work out final plans for an Allied flanking movement by a new landing to the north, which he had at first opposed, General Eisenhower departed for Tunisia.
The matter for discussion was a proposed amphibious operation against Anzio, to be launched in January.
The invasion was mounted at the port of Naples, which had been virtually demolished by the retreating Nazis only 3 months before. Preloaded supply trucks were used for the first time in the Mediterranean theater. The invasion fleet of small ships was to head north up the coast for 120 miles and put into shore quietly at Anzio. The Allies hoped to capture the small port there before the Nazis had the opportunity to demolish it. Its seizure intact would lighten considerably the problem of supply over beaches exposed to enemy fire. The plan called for a quick strike at the enemy's flank, with fast-moving motorized units playing an essential role. Selected to make the important landing at Anzio was the American 6th Corps, composed of Allied troops who had seen months of action in North Africa, Sicily, and in the Italian campaign to date. Their mission was to seize the port at Anzio, clear out the coastal defense batteries, and proceed inland to engage the enemy, to divert him from his defense of the main front to the south. The invasion fleet put out to sea the day before D-Day, which was set for January 22nd, 1944. Surprise was to be the keynote of the assault. It worked perfectly. Without the customary pre-invasion bombardment, 6th Corps troops swarmed ashore. The enemy was caught completely off guard. So far, the operation was an easy success.
Military strategy may bear some similarity to the chessboard, but it is dangerous to carry the analogy too far. A threatened king in chess must be protected. In war, he may instead choose to fight. The Nazis had not instantly withdrawn from Africa or Sicily merely because of threats to their rear. On the contrary, they had reinforced and fought the battle out to the end. In this case, of course, one of the principal objects was to induce the enemy to reinforce his Italian armies. But it was equally important that this be done in such a way that our own costs be minimized.
But the Nazis did not overlook the Anzio landing force for long. Before the evening of the first day, the Germans reacted swiftly to meet the emergency. New divisions were rushed into Italy from other fronts, and fresh forces were thrown into the battle to stem the advance of the Allied Anzio force. By the morning of the second day, the Germans opened fire in a desperate attempt to wipe out the Allied beachhead. The target area for the savage German attack, Anzio, was badly battered in a few days' time. The Allies quickly consolidated their position and prepared to defend their limited beachhead area stubbornly against any Nazi counterattack, however strong. Every protective measure possible was taken to help assure our effective defense of that position. The first German assaults had been withstood successfully, but the Allied troops were fully aware that the Nazis were far from finished with them.
In the final outcome, the Anzio operation paid off handsomely, but in its initial stages it developed exactly as my headquarters thought it would. Before real results were achieved, the Anzio force had to be built up to more than 6 divisions and had to fight under adverse conditions for some 4 months. On the other hand, the move undoubtedly convinced Hitler that we intended to push the Italian campaign as a major operation. This was a great advantage to the Allies elsewhere.
As a further precautionary measure, mines were planted liberally to harass the Nazis in the event that they succeeded in overrunning our lines. It was by now fairly evident that the enemy was massing for an attack in great force. The Allied Anzio force was fortunate in gaining a little time in which to make thorough preparations for meeting the attack. To counter the expected Nazi assault on their beachhead, the Allies prepared for immediate use every type of heavy artillery piece which they had succeeded in bringing ashore before being pinned down by the Nazi shelling. It was probable that the enemy did not know how much firepower we had concentrated in our beachhead area, and Allied commanders ordered that every possible device be used to prevent them from finding out ahead of time. The Allies used the time to good advantage. After 2 weeks of relative quiet, the enemy commenced their major counterattacks. The Nazi heavy assault was directed by Field Marshal Kesselring, who commanded Axis forces in Italy. The Germans were finally ready to launch their drive to force the 6th Corps troops back into the sea. For 4 weeks, the Nazis gave it everything they had. The Allies suffered considerable losses in equipment as well as in men. The destruction of quantities of materiel made it that much more difficult for the Allies to defend their hard-won foothold. One of the most effective protective measures was quickly taken. A smoke screen composed of 100 gallons of oil to every 8 gallons of water, compressed into a milky fog, was spread across the Allied beachhead, covering an area of many miles along the coast. But with all our best protective measures, we still suffered heavily under the full weight of the determined Nazi attack. Allied casualties were heavy during the 30-day German assault. Hundreds of GIs killed and thousands wounded. At their underground headquarters, Allied commanders of the 6th Corps rushed plans for an all-out attack upon the reinforced German divisions facing them. The disadvantage of a limited position from which to operate was supplemented by the Allied need for more men and materiel. But the 6th Corps attack could not be held up to wait for any possible attempt to bring reinforcements in by sea. The attack was organized with all possible speed. Every weapon we had was pressed into service as the assault got started. We hit them with everything. Railway-mounted naval guns, 90-millimeter anti-aircraft, packed howitzers, .75s from Sherman tanks, self-propelled 105s on tank chassis, 155s, and the 8-inchers. After the softening up, our tanks went into action. The back of the enemy's resistance was broken, and the men with the rifles moved forward to press the attack. The Nazis were pushed back, but our bombers continued to harass their retreat. The battle-weary GIs finally had an opportunity to enjoy a few moments' respite after the exhausting hours of continuous heavy action. Our attack was once again on the move, and from this point on, the Axis in Italy was fighting a delaying war. During the violent battle at Anzio, the Nazis suffered countless casualties, and thousands of crack German troops from such elite units as the Hermann Goering Division were captured by the Allies. But the Allies, too, had paid a tremendous price. During the first 30 days of the operation in and beyond Anzio, the combat casualties of the 6th Corps amounted to 17% of its effective strength. British combat losses were relatively heavier than American in terms of the number of troops engaged. The British units lost 27% of their effective strength during the same period. In 4 months, about 33,000 casualties were evacuated by sea from Anzio, including 24,000 Americans, without the loss of a single patient's life as a result of the process of moving men from shore hospitals to the waiting ships. But there were nearly 5,000 other Allied troops who were not evacuated. Arriving in London in the early weeks of 1944, General Eisenhower conferred with his staff officers on the highly complex preparations for Operation Overlord, the long-awaited invasion across the Channel.
Now began again the task of preparing for an invasion. But by comparison with the similar job of a year and a half earlier, order had replaced disorder, and certainty and confidence had replaced fear and doubt.
From the United States came hundreds of thousands of freshly trained GIs, swelling to gigantic proportions the force which was to participate in the greatest invasion in history. The nucleus for this invasion force was formed by the battle-tested veterans of the campaigns in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy during the grim year and a half just past. From puny beginnings, the U.S. Army was now grown into one mighty offensive weapon with one objective.
Leary Valley lies in the Italian Midland, some 60 miles northwest of Naples to some 40 miles southeast of Rome. A wide, flat corridor enclosed between 4 walls of mountains. In winter, the highest peaks of the Leary Range ascend into the snows, but the valley floor with its olive groves and ancient vines, its crops of wheat and corn, is green the year around. That is, in normal times. Last year was a bad year for grapes and olives, and the fall planting was late. Many fields lay fallow. There are 2 ways from the south into the valley. One, a narrow pass. The other, a high, scenic road over the mountains. They converge before the site of the ancient village of San Pietro, which for 700 years has stood at the threshold of Leary Valley, welcoming the traveler. The stones of its walls were quarried out of the parent hill from whose slopes it rises. Population 1,412 at the last census. A farming community. Patron St. Peter. Point of interest, St. Peter's 1438. Note interesting treatment of chancel. As St. Peter's was erected by those who were to worship there, so each original dwelling was built by the ones who were to live there. And this practice has endured down through the centuries. From the end of October 1943 until the middle of December, San Pietro and the surrounding ground was the scene of some of the bitterest fighting on our Fifth Army front. The Italian campaign had entered its second phase, the push forward again after a static period brought on by heavy seasonal rains. Our battle lines were haphazard as the terrain itself, with its blood-swollen rivers that twisted back and forth across our line of march, so that each river seemed like five, and where there was no river to cross, a mountain blocked our going. Each peak ahead being a few meters higher than the last we had won, so that each new peak had to be fought for the hard, uphill way, with the enemy looking down our throats. They had had time to fortify and camouflage their positions. No amount of artillery fire or aerial bombardment could force them to withdraw. That was for the infantry to do, employing those weapons to confine and destroy life in narrow trenches, caves, and fighting holes. It was up to the man with the rifle, the man under fire from all weapons, the man whose way all our weapons, land, air, and sea, serve only to prepare. It was up to the foot soldier to attack a hidden enemy over ground that was sown with mines, the anti-personnel S-mines that fly up at a football to explode beneath the groin. Nowhere along the entire front were enemy preparations more elaborate than in the San Pietro area. For San Pietro stands at the threshold of Leary Valley, and through Leary Valley, wide and level, runs the most highly prized length of road south of Rome. By early December, we had taken and were holding high ground to the northeast, east, and south of San Pietro, the Camino Maggiore hill mass being last to fall. Italian troops under Allied command had made a vain attempt to capture Mount Lungo, possession of which would have acted greatly to our benefit in the impending action. But so excessive were the losses on Mount Lungo that further operations against its strategic heights were deemed unwarranted. It was thereon determined to make a direct frontal assault on enemy positions around and within San Pietro. Battalions of the 36th Texas Infantry Division were rotated from position to position overlooking the valley, so the troops might study the terrain ahead from various viewpoints. Patrol activity was continuous. Day and night, units went out to reconnoiter the ground, draw fire, take prisoners, thus adding to the sum of our information about the enemy. High points, Mount Lungo's 351 and Mount Samucro's 1205 and 950 were all manned in force. The town itself was strongly garrisoned with numerous mortar, machine gun, and heavy weapon emplacements. 4 enemy battalions were dug into a line of connecting trenches and mutually supporting pillboxes in depth that extended from the base of Mount Lungo, northeast across the valley floor to the base of Mount Samucro. Another battalion was organized to defend the high ground northwest of San Pietro. Areas before these positions were heavily mined and held a confusion of barbed wire and booby traps. On the afternoon before, D-Day and H hour were communicated to battalion commanders. December 8th, at 0620 hours, the 1st Battalion of the 143rd Infantry Regiment to attack the summit of 1205, having moved up the mountain under cover of darkness, and upon achieving its objective, to attack along the ridge to a point northwest of San Pietro. The 3rd Ranger Battalion likewise to attack 950, another feature of the Mount Samocro hill mass. The 2nd Battalion of the 143rd to attack over the terraced olive orchards northeast of San Pietro. The 3rd Battalion acting in support to follow the 2nd at 400 yards. Of the original force to establish the beachhead at Salerno, the 143rd had since spent all but a fortnight in action under extremely bitter weather conditions. At Salerno, at the Volturno crossing, it had taken mortal punishment. The task ahead promised no less bloodshed, yet it was undertaken in good spirits and high confidence. The 1st Battalion began the long, rugged climb up Mount Samocro. As night fell, our artillery opened up, and throughout the night hours, intense fire was laid down on the enemy's main line of resistance. It had rained most of the night, and it was raining at each hour when the 2nd and 3rd Battalions crossed the line of departure. Some 200 yards forward, they encountered wire, mines, and automatic fire from pillboxes. Mortar and artillery were deadly accurate by reason of excellent enemy observation from Mount Lungo, overlooking our advance, which continued another 200 to 400 yards. Many men gave their lives in attempts to jump the wire, reach pillboxes, and throw hand grenades through the narrow gun openings. The 3rd Battalion was committed. The attack on Hill 1205, however, was a brilliant success. Leading elements of the 1st Battalion had gained the summit of the objective before a strongly entrenched enemy knew that an assault was in progress. the right of 1205, the 3rd Ranger Battalion had also captured its objective, but only after successive attacks and costly casualties. For on Hill 950, the enemy was not taken unaware. Counterattacks were to be expected on both 1205 and 950. They were not long developing. The first was launched during the early daylight hours, and even as it was beaten off, another took form. Day and night they followed in unremitting violence. Acting in excellent cooperation, the artillery's supporting power disrupted numerous enemy counterattacks while they were in the process of being formed. In addition to defending Hill 1205, the 1st Battalion, obedient to the field order, undertook the reduction of enemy defenses which were organized along the ridge running west. December, the 1st Battalion was reinforced with the 504th Parachute Battalion, which took over and maintained the defenses of 1205 and 950, thereby enabling the 1st Battalion to throw its entire remaining strength into the assault along the ridge. But the 1st strength had dwindled and shrunk in the 5 days past, and there was now a question as to whether its existing numbers were sufficient to prevail. Reports during the night of the 14th of December stated that the enemy was offering bitter resistance and that the issue was in grave doubt. Meanwhile, on the olive terraces below, the 2nd and 3rd Battalions had twice again attempted to reach their objective. Both times they had come up against a wall of automatic weapon, mortar, and artillery fire. Volunteer patrols made desperate attempts to reach enemy positions and reduce strong points. Not a single member of any such patrol ever came back alive. Our attacking forces were furnished excellent aerial cover by Allied fighter patrols. But now and then, enemy planes were able to slip through and to bomb and strafe our positions. To all purposes had remained unchanged since the 1st day. To break the deadlock, orders were given for a coordinated divisional attack. The 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 143rd to proceed in the execution of the original orders. Acting in conjunction, Company A of the 753rd Tank Battalion to attack San Pietro from the east over the high road. 1 battalion of the 141st to attack over the flat valley floor. After nightfall on D-Day, the 142nd Infantry Regiment to attack the heights of Mount Lungo. In preparation for the attack, all 5th Army artillery within range, including tanks and all tracks, was directed against San Pietro and the surrounding area. 141st Infantry advanced some 400 yards from its line of departure, to be borne down and held powerless under the weight of enemy fire. The 2nd and 3rd Battalions of the 143rd advanced some 100 yards beyond their former positions to a point almost directly before forward enemy defenses. And for the 3rd time, they were forced to take such cover as the quaking earth could offer. And the tanks. Orders were for them to enter the town and to locate and destroy the heavy weapons there, which were leveled against our attacking foot soldiers. The high road into San Pietro was a narrow mountain road, and from the beginning of its winding descent into Leary Valley, it was under direct enemy observation. Tanks started down that road. Three reached the outskirts of the town. Entering the town, they discovered that San Pietro was ours for the taking. The 2nd and 3rd Battalions, less than a rifle company in strength, weary to death who were alive, stumbled forward past San Pietro to consolidate gains and reestablish contact with the enemy, now taking up new positions some 5 kilometers beyond. That is the broad shape of the Battle of San Pietro, which was but the first of many battles in Leary Valley. It was a very costly battle. After the battle, the 143rd Infantry Regiment alone required 1,100 replacements. The lives lost were precious lives. To their country, to their loved ones, and to the men themselves. For the living of the 143rd Infantry Regiment, more than 100 decorations for acts of valor above and beyond the call of duty. Many among these you see alive here have since joined the ranks of their brothers in arms who fell at San Pietro. For ahead lay San Vittore and the Rapido River and Cassino, and beyond Cassino, more rivers and more mountains and more towns, more San Pietros, greater or lesser, 1,000 more. As the battle passed over and beyond San Pietro, westward, townspeople began to appear, coming out of their caves in the mountains, where they had stayed in hiding during the enemy occupation. They were mostly old people and children. It was to free them and their farmlands that we came. Behind our lines, southwest to the sea, the fields are green with growing crops planted after our coming by other people of other towns who believed likewise.